The value of statement, you'll see that quite a bit, and it's something we'll use a lot of for this part of the class. This is essentially the recipe for it. It's a XSL value of select, and then this is where you would use your XPath technology. And XPath basically, it's just a path or the directory location of where you're trying to get to, telling the parser to get to in your XML document. It's the tool, this XPath, of how you navigate XML document. And the value of is just basically when you navigate it, you select it and use it, and usually it's printed out in some way or another. So the XPath selects the contents of the element, and then the value of select sort of adds it to that output stream. You can select attributes if you want as well. For exercises and homeworks, I don't mess with attributes too much, but in the book, Goldberg uses attributes quite a bit, so when I do the examples, we'll look at some of those. Again, it's used quite often in XSLT documents, so we'll get to see them and use them and get really comfortable with them. So XSLT, or excuse me, the value of command is not really a container. There's no other code that goes inside that, or is that a child of it? So it always ends with a slash. It's a self-closing sort of command. So you might have something like a heading 1 command here that's closed out, but inside of that you're going to have your value of select command, and it's just going to be closed out here with a self-closing tag. For each is a very powerful XSL command. For each is your looping command, so if you've done any kind of programming before, any kind of programming, you're usually going to learn how to do loops. They're sort of fundamental to programming because it helps us very efficiently work through navigating data and so forth. So the for each is a kind of loop statement. Here's the more or less the basic syntax you're going to see for it. It's going to be an open XSL for each command, and then you're always going to have to close it out. And inside this is the text or the commands you're going to put in there, the rules that you're going to apply to that loop. Like, what's the criteria for this loop? Why are you looping over all this data? And you're going to have, again, an XPath expression in there. So you're going to have to, whatever XML data you're going to be looping over, you're going to have to tell that for each command where to go to find that set of nodes, if you will, or set of data to loop over. Here's a little example. Imagine we have a books file that's got books as a parent, and then we have book for each record. We might have, you know, all of Herman Melville, for example, or a fantasy writer like Terry Pratchett, whatever. But it's a big XML file of book records in there. And say we want to loop over all of them, well, we could do a little literal here, an HTML literal, which is UL. If you do HTML, we're not going to do a lot of it, but you're going to do just enough to kind of get your feet wet. This is an unordered list, UL. Inside of that, you're going to do your for each loop. Here you're going to do your XPath expression, books, and then books. So that's going to go and basically grab or make accessible all the book records or book nodes, if you will, in that XML file. Sets them up, and then in here, when we're running our loop, and we're going to get to look at this more in depth when we look at examples, but we're just going to talk about it sort of briefly right now. We have our list command, so li is for listing. That's when you usually get either numbers or bullets in an HTML output file. You open up your li command, you're going to close it over here, and then inside here we're already seeing the value of select. And in this case, we're in book, so we're going to be looping over and say there's 100 books in there. It's going to loop through every book node, and inside of that it's going to look for an element called title. And it's going to grab that title. So say, for example, we're doing all the books of Herman Melville, and one of the titles happened to be Moby Dick. When it grabs that title, which is the book title, it's going to output the value Moby Dick of whatever's in that XML file. And it's going to make it as a bullet. And it's going to go through all those books until each one of those book nodes, until it's exhausted it. Once it's run through it and it's done looping, it quits, closes out with our HTML or unordered list tag, and then you're done. Here's another example of a tree node. We might have our for each. Again, we've selected article and then author. So here's our article node, our root node, and then it goes in one to author. So we have the parent-child relationship. Here's the XPath expression, article, author. And then once you're on, so to speak, on the author node, then your value of select command has access to it, this F name and last L name, or first name, last name. And so again, this is kind of code that's been sort of out of context here, and we're just looking at the code itself. But I can run my value of select command, and all I have to do is do F name and L name, and because the expression is already on the author node, anything that's in author, any child of that, all I have to do is just do a value of select F name, L name, and I can get access to it right away. I don't need to write out the full expression again. Again, I could if I wanted to, but it would be redundant at that point. We also have ways of conditionally testing nodes. Again, all programming languages that can be called a programming language have to have a way to test things conditionally. That's how you would, basically any program has that ability to do it, any programming language. In this node, basically it asks the question, is this the node I want? Does it meet the prescribed conditions that I've set out for? If so, get it. If not, skip it. So here we have a for each command. Again, it's our books XML file. We've done an XPath expression down to the book node level. And here I've got a little XSL command and my if. I test it. Here's my XPath expression. Author. Author is a child of book, so I have access to that because we've already run our XPath expression. Author, and then here I'm actually checking the value of author, what's inside of the element author. So here I have the author Terry Pratchett, and I do it, if you notice, it's a single quote that will allow me to get the value of author. And then basically I'm checking, is it true? If so, it will print out the title of that book. So I could pretty much go through, if I had an XML file of books of all the Terry Pratchett books, it would loop through and say there were other ones. Say there was J.K. Rowling was in there. Basically, it would go through and test every one of them, and if they equal Terry Pratchett, it will print out the title of that Terry Pratchett book. If it's J.K. Rowling, J.R.R. Tolkien, whoever, it's going to ignore those because it's not going to meet that prescribed condition for equaling Terry Pratchett. So it loops through all that. Once it's done, it closes all this stuff out, and then it's done. Choose is another sort of conditional kind of command that xslt has, like if. It allows you to specify what happens if a condition fails. So before we had if, and it did something. If not, all it did was just skip it. It really didn't do anything per se. It just skipped it. So here, if it doesn't meet one condition, you can do something else. So it's sort of an if-then statement, if you will. No pun intended. So we have XSL : choose, XSL, and then when, and then we're going to test, and this is where we're going to basically run our XPath, and then we're going to have, if it's equal to that condition, we're going to do some HTML output, and then when is going to get closed out, because it has to be closed out. If it doesn't meet that condition, then it's going to do some other condition. And this is just part of the code here. We're going to look at this much more detailed when we look at the examples. But again, just to give you an idea of some of these programming concepts that XSLT can do. We also have sort. So, you know, in an Excel file or a spreadsheet file, you can sort. You can basically sort rows by in alphabetical order, numeric order. Database, you can do that. Well, you can do the same thing with XSLT. You can actually sort an XML file into some kind of order. You can do it numerically or alphabetically, and this gives you a lot of power because often your XML file is not the way it's ordered in the XML file is not how you want the user to see it when you go to output it to HTML. So you can place an XSL sort command inside of a for each command. Typically it's inside of a for each command because you're going to, in order to sort something or alphabetize something, you need to have a collection of nodes or records, if you will, to sort them, because you're usually sorting something, a pile of something. So in order to do that, you typically have to loop over all these nodes, and the for each command is the one that you use to gather them all up. The attribute of the sort tells what field to sort on. So we have an example here where we have, we're not doing attributes, it's the value. This is attributes for XSL, not a XML attribute. So here's an example. Again, we have our unordered list. We fire off our for each command, so it's going to be a loop where it loops over all the book nodes in our XML file. And this is just the recipe it follows, and you're going to see this in your exercise and a homework. But basically your sort, right after that you do XSL sort select, and you're going to select author to basically sort these on, and then you're going to basically create an order, and you're going to do either ascending or descending. Ascending means if it's numeric, it's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. If it's descending, whatever the number is, it's going to go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, that sort of thing. If it's alphabetical, ascending is A, B, C, D. If it's descending, it's, I can't do my alphabet very well backwards, but Z, Y, X, and so on and so forth. So that's descending and ascending, and that's the order. Then the other thing we need to set is our data type. And so what is the type of data we're working with that we're going to be alphabetizing? So if it's text, which if we're doing an author here, it's going to be letters, right? There's not going to be numbers for an author's name. So we're going to set it to text, and so the author is going to be alphabetized, so to speak, in descending order. So it would go from Z to A that way. So we're going to be working through this loop, and it's going to go and find the value of that title, print that out, the value of the author, and print that out. And it's going to print all this out from Z to A in descending order. Once it's done, it closes out the for each, and then your unordered list gets finished. So basically it creates a list of titles and authors sorted by author. Some thoughts on XSLT. XSL, as I mentioned, it's a programming language. It's a little bit different than a general purpose language when we think of, I've mentioned some of these before, but like PHP, Java, which is a huge programming language, or C++, C, but smaller ones, say like Perl or Python. Those are general purpose languages and general purpose programming languages, and those are languages that you can do almost anything with. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, but you can basically do anything you want with them. XSLT, it is useless unless you have XML to work on. You cannot really like design a program, so to speak, or a game like you know, an adventure game or some kind of scientific application using XSLT unless you're using it on XML. So it really was designed to support XML, to make XML very easy to work with. So it's easy to learn. If you haven't ever done any programming, this is going to get your feet wet very quickly, and you're going to be doing programming before you know it. But it's a little harder to write, and debugging can be kind of tough, and it's harder to write in the sense that it's verbose. If you ever look at a Perl language, Perl script, or a Python script, it's very tersely written. It's very efficient how it's written. XSLT, on the other hand, it's verbose. You know, you're using tags for starters, so right off the bat, it's a little more wordy, so to speak. The debugging can be a little tricky, and we're going to work through that, and there's like little skills you can do to learn the debugging, but it's just that part of it is some of the tools we have for debugging are a little bit limited, so we have to kind of be patient with it. But there are ways you can build your program that sort of allow you to iteratively, sort of step by step, basically build out your program, and you'll find debugging's much easier. Notepad++, as I alluded to, is not a lot of help with debugging. You'll have to make sure that the xslt that you make is well formed. Remember, it has to be well formed, and it will help with that. But you're going to have to incrementally build your xslt, and you're going to use your browsers basically to test with some of that. So if it's working, then you kind of move on to the next part of the program. If it's not, then you need to sort of do some debugging. That's pretty much it for my lesson on xslt. We're going to look at some examples and actually get to play with some, and I think some of these sort of commands and some of the principles I showed you will really start to make some sense then.